The wind in the Texas Panhandle did not merely blow in the year of our Lord 1875. It scoured. It possessed a grit and a temper that could strip the paint off a wagon wheel, or the hope out of a man's soul if he stood still long enough to let it. It was a landscape of vast, terrifying openness, a sea of red dirt and gray sagebrush that stretched all the way to the edge of the world, broken only by the flat-topped mesas that rose like ancient altars to forgotten gods. The great herds of buffalo that had once blackened these plains like storm clouds were thinning now, reduced to scattered pockets of survivors, leaving behind bleached bones that glowed white under the relentless sun. In their place, the iron rails were coming. They were creeping westward like a black snake through the grass, bringing with them the promise of commerce and the finality of conquest. The town of Red Rock was the child of this ambition. It was a raw, ugly thing, a collection of timber and adobe huddled together against the elements. It boasted a church with a bell that cracked on high notes, 3 saloons that never closed, and a future train depot that currently existed only as a foundation of mud and optimism. Rose McKenna rode through this land as if she were part of the wind itself. It was barely dawn, that bruised purple hour before the sun set the prairie on fire, and she was alone. She rode astride, her skirts bunched up around her thighs, a scandalous posture that would have caused the matrons of Red Rock to faint in their corsets had they seen her. But out here, with the smell of horse sweat and damp sage filling her lungs, Rose was not a lady. She was a creature of blood and bone, alive in a way she never was inside the parlor. She reined her gelding in atop a low rise and looked down at her father's herd. 500 head of longhorns were waking up, their breath misting in the cool morning air. They were money on the hoof, her father liked to say. To Rose, they looked like the land itself, wild, horned, and dangerous. She took a deep breath, trying to fill the hollow spaces inside her chest. In an hour, she would have to return to the ranch house. She would have to lace herself into the whalebone corset that squeezed her ribs until she could only take shallow, polite sips of air. She would have to pin her unruly red hair into a severe bun and lower her eyes when men spoke. But for this moment, under the vast indifference of the sky, she belonged only to herself. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the illusion of freedom had evaporated. The air inside the First Church of Red Rock was thick with the smell of unwashed wool, stale lavender water, and self-righteousness. Rose sat in the front pew between her mother, Shauna, and her father, Patrick. The hard wood of the bench bit into her spine, a physical reminder of the rigidity of their lives. The Reverend Thomas was a man who seemed to believe that God was hard of hearing, for he bellowed his sermon with a face turning the color of a boiled beet. "And I say to you," the Reverend thundered, slamming a heavy hand onto the pulpit, "that we are the bringers of light to a dark land. The wilderness is filled with the snares of the devil, the heathen, the savage, the godless Comanche who reject the mercy of the Lord. They are the thorns in the garden we are trying to plant." Rose kept her hands folded demurely in her lap, her gloves spotless white, but her mind was drifting out the open window. She could see a hawk circling high above the town, hunting. It did not care about scripture or civilization. It only knew hunger and the wind. "We must be vigilant," the Reverend continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, "for the devil does not always come with horns. Sometimes he comes with a painted face and a bow, seeking to steal our women and slaughter our babies." Beside her, Shauna McKenna stiffened slightly. It was a microscopic movement, invisible to anyone who did not know her. But Rose felt it. Her mother's face remained a mask of pious attention, but her rough, capable hands gripped her Bible until the knuckles turned white. Rose looked at the side of her mother's face. Shauna was a woman of the Irish coast, transplanted to this arid hell, and she carried a silence in her that was deeper than any well in Texas. After the service, the congregation spilled out into the blinding sunlight of the churchyard. This was the true town meeting, where business was conducted under the guise of fellowship. Major Nathaniel Briggs was holding court near the church steps. He was a man of precise angles, his uniform pressed sharp enough to cut paper, his mustache waxed into rigid points. He did not look like he belonged in the dust. He looked like he belonged on a minted coin. "The railroad is not just a convenience. Friends," Major Briggs was saying to a gathering of ranch owners and merchants. His voice was smooth, devoid of the preacher's fire, but heavy with the weight of authority. "It is the artery of civilization. But the railroad cannot run through a war zone. The investors in Chicago and New York demand security." Cole Harris stood at the major's right hand, nodding in agreement. Cole was the deputy sheriff, a man who wore his badge as if it were a license to do whatever he pleased. He was handsome in a heavy-jawed, predator sort of way, with sandy hair and eyes that were a shade too pale, like water in a tin bucket. "What the major means," Cole said, hooking his thumbs into his gun belt, "is that we are going to clean up the panhandle once and for all. No more looking over your shoulder when you ride out to check the fence line." Patrick McKenna, Rose's father, stepped forward. He was a burly man, his face weathered like old saddle leather. "And what about the treaties?" "Major, the government promised them land north of the river." Major Briggs smiled, a thin stretching of lips that did not reach his eyes. "Treaties are for nations. Mr. McKenna, we are dealing with wandering bands of hostiles who refuse to stay on the reservation. They are obstacles to progress. And progress, sir, is inevitable." Cole Harris turned and saw Rose standing by the wagon. His face softened into a smile that made Rose's skin prickle. He walked over, tipping his hat. "Miss Rose," he said, "you look lovely this morning. That blue dress brings out the color of your eyes." "Thank you, Deputy Harris," Rose said, her voice polite and flat. "Please, call me Cole. We have known each other long enough," he said, stepping a little too close, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice. "I was listening to the major. You do not have to worry. As long as I am wearing this badge, no savage will get within 10 miles of your porch. I protect what is mine." "What is mine?" The phrasing hung in the air between them. Rose looked up at him, seeing the possessiveness in his gaze. He did not look at her as a person. He looked at her the way her father looked at the prize land along the creek, something valuable, something to be fenced in and guarded. "I am sure the whole town appreciates your service." "Deputy," she said, turning away to help her mother into the wagon. She felt his eyes on her back, heavy and expectant. 20 miles away, the world was different. The terrain here was broken and jagged, a chaotic jumble of canyons and arroyos that confused the eye and hid the movement of men. In a deep box canyon near the Painted River, a small band of Comanche had made their camp. They were the Quahati, the antelope eaters, the last free people of the plains. Tahu sat on his heels by a small fire, stripping the bark from a willow branch. He was young, perhaps 24 winters, with a body honed by a life of constant motion. His hair was long and black, wrapped in otter fur, and across his chest ran the faint, puckered line of an old bullet wound, a gift from a Texas Ranger 3 years ago. Opposite him sat Grey Wolf, an elder whose face was a map of wrinkles so deep they looked like cracks in dry mud. "We cannot stay here." "Tahu," Grey Wolf said, his voice a dry rasp. "The Bluecoats are patrolling closer every day. The buffalo have not come this season. The children are crying from hunger." "And where shall we go?" Tahu asked, his voice low and hard. "North to the reservation, to eat the maggot-filled beef the government throws at us, to die of the coughing sickness in their square houses." "To the high plains," Grey Wolf argued. "Further west, into the Llano Estacado. The white men fear the thirst there." Tahu snapped the willow branch in his hands. "There is no water there for the horses." "If we go there, we die slowly. Here, we have the Painted River. This is the water of our fathers. The spirits dwell in the canyon walls. The spirits cannot stop the bullets of the long rifles," Grey Wolf said sadly. Tahu stood up, pacing the small circle of the firelight. He felt the weight of the camp on his shoulders. He was not a chief, but the chiefs were dead or captured. He was a war leader of a band of ghosts. He looked at the women scraping hides in the shadows, at the children playing quietly with sticks. They were thin. Their ribs showed through their skin. Earlier that day, Tahu had ridden to the edge of the river. He had seen the sign. It was a wooden stake, painted white with black numbers on it, driven into the red mud of the riverbank. It was not a weapon of war, but it terrified him more than a cannon. It was a surveyor's stake. It meant the iron road was coming. It meant the white men were measuring the earth, cutting it into squares to be sold. He had pulled the stake from the ground and snapped it over his knee, but he knew it was futile. It was like trying to hold back the tide with a handful of sand. "We stay," Tahu said finally. "For now. We protect the river. If we lose the water, we are dust." The sun was setting by the time the McKenna wagon rattled back into the ranch yard. The house was a sturdy structure of limestone and timber, built to withstand sieges of both weather and men. Dinner was a quiet affair, dominated by the clinking of silverware and china. Patrick McKenna was in high spirits, fortified by a glass of whiskey. "I spoke to the railroad agent after the sermon," Patrick said, sawing into his beef. "They are going to need beef to feed the work crews. Thousands of pounds a month. He offered me a contract, Shauna, 6 cents a pound higher than the market in Kansas City. Do you know what that means?" "It means we will be rich," Shauna said, not looking up from her plate. Her tone was devoid of joy. "It means security," Patrick insisted. "It means I can build that new barn. I can buy you that piano you always wanted. I can send Rose to a finishing school in St. Louis if she wants." Rose looked up, startled. "I do not want to go to St. Louis. Father—" "It is civilization, girl," Patrick grunted. "Better than drying up out here like an old corn husk. Cole Harris asked me about my intentions for the land today. He is a man with a future. That one. You could do worse." Rose lost her appetite. She pushed her peas around her plate. "He has cold eyes. He has land and a badge," Patrick countered. "In this country, that is love enough." Shauna set her fork down with a sharp clink. "Patrick, stop pushing the girl, and stop counting your gold before the harvest. When men start talking about golden railroads, the guns usually speak before God gets a word in." "You are a gloomy woman, Shauna," Patrick muttered, pouring himself another drink. "The army is here now." "Briggs has a plan. He's going to sweep the river clear." "Sweep," Shauna repeated softly, as if people were dust on the floor. Later that night, the house settled into silence. The wind had died down, leaving a stillness that felt heavy and expectant. Rose could not sleep. The conversation at dinner sat in her stomach like a stone. St. Louis, Cole Harris, sweep the river clear. She put on her wrapper and stepped out onto the porch. The wooden boards were cool under her bare feet. The night was vast and starry. The Milky Way a smear of crushed diamonds across the black velvet sky. She leaned against the railing, looking south toward the river. It was miles away, invisible in the dark, but she knew where it lay. Then she heard it. It was faint, carried on a rogue current of air, the sound of horses, not the shod hooves of the ranch horses, which struck the earth with a heavy, metallic rhythm. These were unshod hooves, softer, a rhythmic drumming against the grass. She strained her eyes against the darkness. Far off, near the line of the horizon where the land dipped toward the river breaks, she saw a flicker. It was a tiny pinprick of orange light. A fire. It flared for a second and then vanished, likely smothered quickly. A shiver ran down her arms. Comanche. It had to be. No cowboy would hide his fire in such a way. The Reverend's words echoed in her mind. Devils! Savages! Threat! She should wake her father. She should tell him there were riders near the southern pasture. He would send the hands out with rifles. They would ride to town and get Cole Harris. There would be shooting. Rose opened her mouth to call out, but then she closed it. On the wind, following the sound of the horses, came something else. It was so faint she thought she might be imagining it. A voice, a high, keening sound, rising and falling in a minor key. It was a song. It was not a war cry. It was a lullaby. The melody twisted into her memory, unlocking a door she had kept shut for 15 years. Suddenly, Rose was not 20 years old standing on a porch. She was 5 years old. burning with fever in a wagon that had broken down miles from nowhere. Her father had ridden for help and not returned for 2 days. Her mother had been unconscious with the same sickness. Rose remembered the heat, the terrible, dry thirst, and then the shadow falling over her. She remembered the fear, the certainty that the monster had come, but the hands that lifted her were not rough. They were brown and smelled of sage and wood smoke. A woman with braids wrapped in fur. The woman had held a gourd of water to Rose's cracked lips. She had wiped Rose's forehead with a damp cloth, and she had hummed that song. This song, a song about the moon and the rabbit, a rhythm that slowed the frantic beating of a child's heart. The woman had stayed until the fever broke, vanishing into the grass just before Patrick McKenna returned with the doctor. Rose had never told anyone. Her father would have said it was a fever dream, or worse. He would have been enraged that a savage had touched his child, but Rose knew. She remembered the kindness in the dark eyes that looked nothing like the eyes of a devil. Rose stood on the porch, gripping the rough wood of the railing. The song faded into the silence of the prairie. "God help me," she whispered to the darkness. She turned and went back inside, locking the door behind her. She did not wake her father. She did not wake the ranch hands. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the beating of her own heart, keeping the secret of the fire and the song locked tight in her chest. She did not know it yet, but in that silence, she had already chosen a side. The afternoon heat lay upon the Texas panhandle like a heavy woolen blanket, stifling and relentless. It was 2 o'clock, and the sun had bleached the color from the sky, turning the vibrant blue of morning into a hazy, shimmering white. The air was so dry it seemed to crackle, and the only sound was the drone of cicadas hidden in the scrub oak, a monotonous choir that grated on the nerves. Rose McKenna adjusted her hat, pulling the brim lower to shield her eyes from the glare. She was riding a few miles south of the ranch house, ostensibly checking on a wayward cluster of heifers that had drifted from the main herd. But in truth, she was escaping. The house, with its thick walls and her mother's silent worry and her father's loud ambitions, felt like a prison. Out here, with the dust coating her throat and the smell of sagebrush rising from the baked earth, she could breathe, even if the air was hot enough to scorch her lungs. She knew she was close to the boundary her father had set. "Do not go past the ridge," Patrick McKenna had warned. "The river is dangerous. The Comanches are desperate." But the river called to her. The painted river was the only vein of life in this parched landscape. And the cattle knew it too. The small group of longhorns she was trailing had caught the scent of water and were plodding steadily toward the break in the land that marked the riverbed. Rose let them go. She told herself she would just turn them back once they had drunk their fill. But deep down, she wanted to see the water herself. She wanted to see the place where the red earth met the cool green flow, the place that felt ancient and indifferent to the surveyor stakes and railway lines. On the opposite bank of the painted river, hidden within a dense thicket of willow and tamarisk, Tahu watched the cattle descend the slope. His grip tightened on his bow, the bois d'arc wood smooth and warm against his palm. Beside him, Little Fawn lay flat on her stomach, her dark eyes narrowing as she peered through the leaves. "More of them," Little Fawn whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of the wind. "They muddy the water. They trample the banks where the medicine herbs grow." Tahu felt a surge of anger that burned hotter than the sun on his back. The buffalo were gone, replaced by these stupid, slow beasts that belonged to the white men. Every cow that drank from the river was a theft. Every hoof that churned the mud was an insult to the spirits that dwelled in the water. "They should not be here," Tahu murmured. He saw the rider on the crest of the hill. A woman. She sat her horse well, he noted, but that did not change what she was. She was the daughter of the encroachers. She was the face of the hunger that was eating his land. "Shall I kill the steers?" Little Fawn asked, reaching for an arrow. "No," Tahu said. "If we kill the cattle, the bluecoats will come hunting us before the moon is full. We will just scare them back. Make them fear this place." He knocked an arrow, Not a war shaft with a barbed iron point, but a blunt-headed arrow used for small game. He did not intend to strike the woman or the cattle. He aimed high, calculating the arc that would send the missile whistling through the air to land just in front of the lead steer. Turning the herd, he drew the string back to his ear. Feeling the familiar tension in his shoulder muscles, he took a breath, held it, and released it. The arrow sang. It was a sharp, biting sound that cut through the lazy heat. However, Tahu had miscalculated the wind swirling up from the canyon floor. The arrow did not land in front of the steer. It whistled past the ear of Rose's horse, the fletching buzzing like an angry hornet, the gelding, already skittish from the smell of the river and the heat, panicked. He reared violently, twisting his body in mid-air. Rose, caught entirely by surprise, lost her stirrups. She was thrown backward, the sky and the earth swapping places in a dizzying blur. She hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she heard the sickening crunch of her ankle twisting in the loose shale of the riverbank. Her rifle, which had been scabbarded on the saddle, flew from its leather sheath and skittered down the slope, coming to rest near the water's edge, far out of her reach. Pain shot up her leg, white-hot and blinding. Rose gasped, trying to sit up, but the world was spinning. Through the fog of pain, she saw her horse bolting, but in his panic, the animal was not running back up the slope toward safety. He was sliding uncontrollably down the steep, sandy bank, straight toward a deep, churning eddy of the river where the current undercut the rock. "No!" she cried out, her voice weak. On the other side of the river, Tahu cursed. He had meant to frighten, not to destroy. He watched the horse slide, its eyes wide with terror. To a Comanche, a horse was not just a beast of burden, it was a brother, a spirit, a life of immense value. He could not watch a good horse break its legs or drown because of a white man's foolishness. Without thinking, breaking every rule of caution he had imposed on his warriors, Tahu broke cover. "Stay here," he commanded Little Fawn, and he sprinted across the shallow ford. Rose was struggling to crawl toward her rifle when she heard the splash of water and the thud of moccasins on wet sand. She looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A figure burst from the river willows. He was terrifying. He was stripped to the waist, his skin the color of polished copper, painted with a stripe of yellow ochre across his chest. His black hair flew behind him. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a human man. Comanche. The word froze the blood in her veins. She scrambled backward, her hands clawing at the dirt, ignoring the screaming pain in her ankle. She expected a knife. She expected the scalping blade she had heard the Reverend preach about. But the warrior ran past her. He lunged for the trailing reins of her horse just as the animal's hind legs began to slip into the deep water. With a shout that sounded like the crack of a whip, he grabbed the leather strap and hauled back, digging his heels into the mud. The muscles in his back and arms corded with strain as he pitted his strength against the 1,000-pound animal. He shouted something in his own tongue, a harsh, guttural command that somehow cut through the horse's panic. The gelding stopped, trembling, its hooves finding purchase on the solid ground. The warrior held the animal steady for a moment, stroking its nose, calming it with a touch that was surprisingly gentle. Then, slowly, he turned to look at Rose. They were less than 10 feet apart. The silence that fell between them was heavier than the heat. Rose stared at him, her chest heaving. She saw the war paint. She saw the knife sheathed at his waist. She saw the enemy. But as she looked up into his face, she saw something else. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than she was. His chest was heaving from the exertion, and in his dark eyes, she did not see the mindless, demonic hatred she had been taught to expect. She saw exhaustion. She saw a deep, ancient weariness. And Tahu looked at her. He saw a girl in a dust-covered blue riding habit, her red hair escaping its pins to fall around a face pale with shock. He expected to see the look he always saw on white faces, the revulsion. The look one gives to a rattlesnake or a wolf. But he did not see it. Her eyes were wide, the color of the sky after a storm. and they held fear. Yes, but also a raw, unmasked curiosity. She was looking at him, not at a monster. For a heartbeat, the war did not exist. There was only the sound of the river and the breathing of two people who had crossed a line they could not uncross. Crack! The sound of a gunshot shattered the moment. A bullet kicked up a spray of sand inches from Tahu's foot. Rose screamed. Tahu spun around, crouching low. On the ridge above them, silhouetted against the blinding sun, were three riders, even at this distance. The glint of the deputy's badge on Cole Harris's chest was visible. "Get away from her, you filth!" Cole's voice drifted down, distorted by rage. Another shot rang out. This one struck the rock beside Rose's head, sending stone splinters flying into her cheek. Cole and the ranch hands were firing blindly. Assuming Rose was being attacked, they did not care that she was in the line of fire. Their blood was up, and they saw a savage standing over a white woman. Tahu looked at the ridge, then at Rose. He could run. He could dive into the river and be gone into the reeds before they could reload. It was the sensible thing to do. It was the warrior's choice. But he looked at the girl. She was hurt. She could not move, and the bullets were raining down around her like hail. He did not run away. He ran toward her. Rose flinched, thinking he was coming to kill her before he fled. Instead, he threw himself fast and low, hitting her with the force of a tackling cougar. He drove her backward, rolling them both into a shallow depression in the sandbank, a small hollow carved by the high water. He landed on top of her, his heavy body pressing her into the grit. "Stay down," he hissed. The words were English, heavily accented, rough like stones rubbing together. Rose gasped. The air crushed from her lungs. She felt the heat of his skin through her thin cotton shirt. She smelled him wood smoke, horse sweat, sage, and the metallic tang of old leather. It was not a bad smell. It was the smell of the earth itself. His weight was immense, pinning her, but his arms were bracketed around her head, shielding her. A bullet thudded into the sand rim just above his shoulder, showering them both with the red dirt. Tahu did not flinch. He kept his head down, his cheek pressed against her hair. Rose lay frozen, her heart hammering against his chest. She realized with a jolt that was more shocking than the gunfire. He is using his body as a shield. He is dying to keep me from dying. From the other side of the river, a different sound joined the fray, the whistle of arrows. Little Fawn had opened fire. She was not shooting to kill, but to suppress. Her arrows arched high and dropped onto the ridge, forcing Cole and his men to scramble for cover behind their horses. "Cover!" Cole shouted. "They are in the trees. It is an ambush." Taking advantage of the confusion, Little Fawn set fire to a pile of dry brush she had prepared. Within seconds, thick, oily white smoke began to billow across the river, obscuring the view from the ridge. Tahu felt the change in the air. He pushed himself up slightly, looking down at Rose one last time. His face was inches from hers. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the utter bewilderment of a worldview shattering. "Do not move," he commanded again. Then he was gone. He rolled away from her, springing to his feet in a crouch, and vanished into the wall of smoke and willows as if he had never been there. Rose lay in the sand, trembling, the imprint of his body still burning on hers. By the time Cole Harris and the two ranch hands made it down the slope, the Comanches were ghosts in the wind. The riverbank was empty save for Rose and her calming horse. Cole holstered his pistol and ran to her, his face flushed with adrenaline and a performance of concern. "Rose, oh my God, Rose!" He knelt beside her, his hands grabbing her shoulders roughly. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch you?" Rose winced as he jostled her injured ankle. She looked at Cole. His eyes were wild, but not with the fatigue she had seen in the Comanche's eyes. Cole's eyes were bright with violence. I fell," Rose stammered, her voice dry. "My horse, he spooked." "I saw him over you," Cole insisted, pulling her up. "I saw that buck standing over you. He was going to drag you off." "Rose, if we had been a minute later." He shuddered. a theatrical gesture for the benefit of the ranch hands. God knows what he would have done to you. Rose started to speak. She wanted to say, "He saved my horse. He covered me from your bullets." But the words died in her throat. She looked at the ranch hands. They were pale, clutching their Winchesters, nodding at Cole's words. They believed the story already. The savage had attacked. The white men had saved her. That was the only story that made sense to them. If she said the Comanche had protected her, they would think she was hysterical. Or worse, that she was lying to protect a heathen. "He held me down," Rose whispered. It was the truth, but twisted by the context Cole had created. Cole's face darkened. "I knew it. Filthy animal." He stood up and looked across the river, spitting into the water. "This is it. This is the last straw. They attack a woman in broad daylight. Major Briggs will hear about this. We are going to wipe them out, every last one of them." He helped Rose onto his own horse, treating her like a fragile, broken doll. But as they rode back toward the town, Rose did not feel fragile. She felt a strange, vibrating tension in her skin. She looked down at her shirt. There was a smear of yellow ochre paint on her shoulder, transferred from the warrior's chest. She brushed her hand over it, hiding it from Cole's view. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood red. In the hidden canyon, the mood was somber. Tahu sat by the fire, cleaning the sand from his knife. The elders sat in a semicircle around him. The silence was judgmental. "You risked yourself," Grey Wolf said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "And not just yourself, but Little Fawn. For what?" "A white woman." "She was unarmed," Tahu said, not looking up. "Her horse was drowning." "They are killing our buffalo," another warrior spat. "They drive us from the water, and you save their horses, you save their women to breed more enemies." Tahu looked up then, his eyes flashing. "I am a warrior, not a butcher. There is no honor in letting a woman die from a fall or be shot by her own people. Her own people were shooting at you," Grey Wolf pointed out gently, "because they thought you were hurting her. You cannot change their minds. Tahu, to them, you are a wolf. Even if you lick their hand, they will only see teeth." Tahu did not answer. He knew the elder was right. He knew it was foolish, but he closed his eyes and he could still feel the weight of the girl beneath him. He could remember the way she had looked at him. It was not the look of a predator and prey. It was the look of two people recognizing each other across a vast, unbridgeable distance. Rose. He had heard the white man call her name. Rose. Like the wild flowers that grew with thorns near the creek beds. Beautiful, but sharp. Back in Red Rock, the story had already grown legs and was running wild. By the time Cole carried Rose into the doctor's office, half the town knew that the sheriff's deputy had fought off a war party of 50 Comanches to save the McKenna girl from a fate worse than death. Major Briggs arrived at the doctor's office while Dr. Evans was binding Rose's ankle. The major looked grave, but there was a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. He needed a provocation to authorize a full-scale campaign, and Cole had just handed him one on a silver platter. "Miss McKenna," Major Briggs said, removing his hat, "I am deeply sorry for your ordeal, but your bravery, your suffering, it will not be in vain. This attack proves that we cannot coexist. I am sending a telegraph to Fort Sill tonight. We will have 2 companies of cavalry here within the week. We are going to sweep the Painted River." Rose sat on the examination table, clutching her mother's hand. Shauna looked at her daughter, her eyes searching. Shauna knew Rose. She saw the hesitation, the shadow behind Rose's eyes. "Rose," Shauna asked softly, "what happened out there?" Rose looked at the major, then at Cole, who was standing by the door looking like a conquering hero. She thought of the yellow paint on her shoulder. She thought of the warrior's heartbeat thudding against her back as the bullet struck the earth. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she was the excuse for a massacre. Thousands of soldiers were coming because a boy had saved her horse. Rose swallowed. "I was terrified," it was all she could say. She let the lie of omission stand, because the truth was too dangerous to speak. But as she lay in her bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the ranch house, she could not sleep. She closed her eyes and she was back in the sand pit. She felt the heavy, protective weight of the enemy. Everyone called him a savage. Everyone called him a monster. But Rose knew the truth that gnawed at her soul. The only person who had tried to kill her today was the man who wanted to marry her. And the only person who had risked his life to save her was the man everyone wanted dead. She brought her hand up to her shoulder, touching the place where the paint had been. "Who are you?" she whispered into the darkness. The morning sun rose over the Texas Panhandle with a deceptive gentleness, casting long, golden shadows across the bruised earth where the skirmish had taken place the day before. The air smelled of sage and drying mud, masking the lingering scent of gunpowder that seemed to hang over the McKenna ranch like a shroud. Rose McKenna sat on the edge of her bed, testing her weight on her injured ankle. It was swollen, turning a shade of angry purple, but the pain was a dull throb rather than the sharp agony of yesterday. Her mother, Shauna, had bound it tight with strips of linen soaked in vinegar and arnica, instructing Rose to stay seated on the porch with her needlepoint. But Rose could not sit. The house felt smaller today. The walls seemed to lean in, whispering with the anxieties of her parents, Patrick's blustering talk of army retribution, and Shauna's silent, terrified prayers. The air inside was stale, recycled through the lungs of people who lived in fear. Rose needed to breathe. "I am going to the creek," Rose announced at breakfast, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "The doctor said the cold water would help the swelling. And I need to find Yarrow. The supply in the pantry is low." Patrick looked up from his coffee, his brow furrowed. "You are not going back to the river, girl. Not after yesterday. Cole says those savages are still lurking in the breaks." "I will stay close to the North Bend," Rose lied, the falsehood tasting like copper on her tongue. "Just where the spring feeds the creek. It is miles from where it happened." Shauna looked at her daughter. She saw the tightness around Rose's mouth, the restless energy in her hands. Shauna nodded slowly. "Take the mare, not the gelding. She is steady. And take the shotgun. Rose, do not hesitate." Rose rode out under the blazing eye of the sun. She did not go to the North Bend. As soon as the ranch house was a speck in the distance, she turned the mare south, drawn by a magnetic pull she could not explain and did not try to resist. She was going back to the Painted River. It took her an hour to reach the place. She avoided the sandbank where the shooting had happened, guiding the mare instead toward a secluded inlet she remembered from childhood explorations. Here, the river cut deep into the limestone, creating a natural pool sheltered by a cathedral of cottonwoods and weeping willows. The branches trailed in the water, creating a curtain of green lace that hid the world away. The silence here was profound. It was not the empty silence of the house, but a living silence, filled with the murmur of water over stone and the rustle of wind in the leaves. Rose slid from the saddle, wincing as her foot touched the ground. She tethered the mare to a sapling and limped toward the water's edge. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed against her heavy riding skirt and the high collar of her blouse. She felt encased in armor, trapped in layers of fabric that defined who she was supposed to be: a rancher's daughter, a deputy's future wife, a victim to be protected. She looked at the water. It was clear and cool, reflecting the blue of the sky. Without letting herself think, Rose began to undo the buttons of her bodice. Her fingers trembled slightly. This was madness. It was dangerous. If anyone from the town saw her, her reputation would be destroyed as surely as if she had been branded. But the need to shed her skin was overwhelming. She stepped out of her heavy skirt, then the petticoats, dropping them onto the dry grass like shedding the petals of a wilting flower. She unlaced her corset, gasping as her ribs expanded, taking in the first deep, true breath she had drawn all day. Finally, she stood in her chemise and drawers. It was not enough. She wanted no barrier between herself and the river. She wanted to be clean. She stripped away the last of the white cotton. Rose stepped into the water. The shock of the cold seized her breath, but it was a welcome pain. She waded deeper until the water lapped at her waist, then her shoulders. She pushed off from the rocky bottom and floated. For the first time in her life, she felt weightless. Her red hair floated around her like a halo of blood and fire. The water held her, indifferent to her name or her race. She turned onto her back, staring up at the patchwork of blue sky visible through the canopy of leaves. She was not Rose McKenna here. She was just a creature of the earth, as wild and natural as the hawk circling above, high above the river, on a limestone bluff that overlooked the bend. Tahu lay flat against the rock. He had seen the dust cloud of a lone rider and had tracked it, fearing it was an army scout marking the location for the coming assault. He had left his horse in a ravine and moved on foot, silent as a shadow, his moccasins finding purchase on stone where no white man would dare to step. He peered over the edge of the cliff, expecting to see a soldier with a spyglass. Instead, he saw the woman. Tahu froze. His breath caught in his throat, and, for a moment, his heart hammered against his ribs with a violence that had nothing to do with war. She was swimming in the deep pool, unaware of his presence. He saw the pale curve of her back as she turned in the water, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves to mottle her skin with gold. She was stark white against the dark green of the river, a contrast so sharp it made his eyes ache. He knew he should look away. The strict code of the Comanche warriors demanded respect for women, and there was a shame in spying on a woman in her bath. But he could not turn his head. He was riveted. This was the scene that would burn itself into his spirit for the rest of his days, the virgin bathing naked in the river. But it was not a look of lust that claimed him. Tahu felt a stirring in his blood that was deeper than the desire of a man for a woman. He watched her float, her arms spread wide, her face turned to the sky with an expression of pure, unadulterated rapture. He recognized that look. It was the look of the eagle riding the thermal. It was the look of the Mustang running before the storm. It was freedom. In that moment, looking down at the daughter of his enemy, Tahu realized that she was a prisoner in her own world, just as he was becoming a prisoner in his. Her nakedness was not seductive to him in that instant. It was a shedding of chains. She belongs to the water, he thought, the words forming clearly in his mind. She belongs to the land, not the stone houses. He made a silent vow to the spirits of the canyon. My eyes have claimed her first. He swore, my eyes have taken this moment, this truth of her. Therefore, my hands will never take her unless she gives them. I will not be another cage. Below, in the water, the wind shifted. The birds in the willows suddenly fell silent. Rose felt it the prickle on the back of her neck, the ancient instinct of being watched. She stopped swimming, treading water, and spun around. Her eyes scanned the riverbank, seeing nothing but shadows. Then she looked up. On the high bluff, 70 feet above her, a figure stood silhouetted against the blinding sky. Rose gasped, the water rushing into her mouth. She choked, flailing, her feet finding the bottom. She crossed her arms over her chest, sinking down until the water reached her chin. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the tranquility. It was him, the warrior. She scrambled toward the bank, her movements clumsy with fear. She dragged herself out of the water, water streaming from her skin, and snatched up her chemise, holding it in front of her like a shield. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. She looked up again, expecting to see him descending the cliff, knife in hand. She expected him to be leering, to be jeering at her shame. But Tahu had not moved. He stood like a statue carved from the red rock itself. He was not looking at her body with hunger. He was looking at her face. Rose's fear began to curdle into something else, anger. And beneath that, a confusing, burning heat. He had seen her. He had seen everything. And yet, he did not look like a man who had stolen something. He looked like a man who had been given a vision, slowly, deliberately. Tahu raised both his empty hands. He showed his palms to her. It was the universal sign of the plains. I have no weapon. I mean no harm, he called out, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of the water. Not hurt. The English words were broken, the vowels flattened and strange, but the intent was clear. Rose stood on the bank, shivering in the heat, the wet chemise clinging to her legs. She clutched the fabric tighter. She should run. She should grab the shotgun from the saddle and fire, but her feet remained rooted to the earth. She looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "You were watching," she accused, though she knew he could likely not understand the sentence. Tahu lowered his hands but did not retreat. He pointed to his own chest. "Tahu! Tahu!" she repeated. The name sounded like the wind in the canyon. He pointed at her. The question was implicit. "Rose!" she called back. "Rose!" He tried the word, testing the sharpness of it. He nodded, as if the name suited her. Then he spoke again, a string of Comanche words that flowed like water over stones. He seemed to realize she could not understand, and he switched back to his limited English. "You, girl, of fire hair." Rose stared at him. A memory flashed in her mind, the fever, the wagon, the dark tent of her delirium. The woman who had saved her had called her something. Pia Mupitz. Big moon no. Tabuha. Sun hair. Without thinking, the words rose from the deep well of her subconscious, dormant for 15 years. "Ha Maruawe," Rose called out. "Hello, friend." The effect on Tahu was instantaneous. He stepped back as if he had been struck. He gripped the edge of the cliff, leaning forward, his stoic mask shattering into shock. "Maruawe," he shouted back. "You speak the tongue." Rose hesitated. She did not know more than a few scraps, fragments of songs and comfort. "Yura." She shouted, "Thank you, ka. She searched for the word for no, or don't hurt me, but found only the word for water. "Pa." Tahu stared down at her, the white woman who swam like an otter and spoke the words of the people. He looked at her face, really looked at her, and the memory clicked into place for him as well. "The sickness," Tahu said, his voice filled with wonder. 5 winters ago, my aunt, she healed a child. She sang to me," Rose said, her voice trembling. She knew he couldn't hear the whisper, so she raised her voice. "She saved me." Tahu looked at Rose. The distance between the cliff and the riverbank seemed to shrink. They were no longer enemies separated by a war. They were two people connected by a debt of life. "You are that child," Tahu said. "The spirits weave a tight blanket." Rose quickly pulled her dress over her head, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She felt a strange intimacy in the air, a tension that was thicker than the humidity. She was dressed now, decent again, but she knew that he knew what lay beneath the blue cotton, and she knew that she would never be able to hide from him. Not really. "Why did you save me yesterday?" Rose asked, shouting up to him. "Why?" Tahu hesitated. He could not explain in her tongue that he saw a kindred spirit. "You did not look with hate," he shouted back. "You look with eyes open." Rose felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She took a step toward the cliff base. "The soldiers," she said, remembering the danger. "They are coming. Major Briggs. He wants to kill you all." "I know," Tahu said simply. "War comes." "You must go," Rose said. "Go away, far away." "This is my home," Tahu replied. He pointed to the river. "My father's blood is in this water." Rose was about to answer, to beg him to be reasonable, to flee the metal monster of the railroad and the army, when a sound cut through the air. Crack. It was distant, perhaps a mile away, but unmistakable. A gunshot, then another, and the heavy thudding of shod hooves. Rose spun around, looking toward the trail she had used. "Soldiers!" she screamed up at the cliff. "Go, Tahu! Go!" Tahu looked toward the horizon. He could see the dust cloud rising. It was a patrol. If they found him here, they would pin him against the cliff. If they found him here with her... He looked down at Rose one last time. He raised his hand to his heart, then extended it toward her. It was a gesture of respect, and perhaps of longing. "Yura, Rose," he called. Then he turned and melted into the brush. He did not run, he simply vanished, blending into the stone and scrub oak so perfectly that Rose blinked and wondered if he had ever been there at all. She scrambled to finish buttoning her dress. Her hair was soaking wet, dripping down her back, staining the blue fabric dark. She grabbed her corset and petticoats, rolling them into a bundle and shoving them into her saddlebag. She could not put them back on. There was no time. She had just finished tightening the cinch on her mare when the riders burst through the trees. It was Cole Harris, accompanied by 4 men. They were heavily armed, their horses frothed with sweat. Cole pulled his horse up so hard it reared. Dust sprang over Rose. "Rose!" Cole shouted, leaping from the saddle. He had his pistol drawn, his eyes scanning the tree line wildly. "We heard you! We heard shouting! Where are they?" Rose stood by her horse, trying to control her breathing. She looked at Cole, the red face, the bulging veins in his neck, the violence radiating off him. Then she thought of the man on the cliff, the man with the copper skin who had raised empty hands. "There is no one here, Cole," Rose said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. Cole holstered his gun and marched over to her. He grabbed her arms, his grip bruising. "Do not lie to me. We heard a voice, a man's voice." "I was singing," Rose lied. "I was singing to the river. I fell in. I was trying to dry off." Cole looked at her. He saw the wet hair plastering her skull. He saw the dress clinging to her damp skin, outlining her figure in a way that made his throat work. He looked at the bundle in her saddlebag, her undergarments. His eyes narrowed. Suspicion, cold and ugly, coiled in his gut. "You are wet," Cole said slowly, "and you are out here, miles from the ranch, without your corset." He touched the damp fabric on her shoulder. "You look like a—" He stopped himself, but the word whore hung in the air between them. "I told you, I slipped," Rose said, pulling away from him. She lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of her mother's stubborn pride. "Are you going to arrest me for falling in a creek, deputy?" Cole stared at her. He looked past her, scanning the cliff face. He saw nothing, but his instinct, the instinct of a jealous man, told him something was wrong. The air smelled different here. It smelled of secrets. "We are riding back," Cole said, his voice flat. "And you are riding in the middle. If I see so much as a shadow move, my boys will shoot it. Do you understand?" "I understand that you are frightening the horses," Rose said coldly. She mounted her mare, ignoring the pain in her ankle. As they rode out of the sanctuary of the trees, Rose did not look back at the cliff. She kept her eyes forward, her back straight, but her skin still burned where the water had touched it, and her heart felt heavy and full. She carried a secret now. A Comanche warrior had seen her as no man ever had stripped of her defenses, naked and free, and he had not taken it. He had given her his name, Tahu. The name echoed in her mind with the rhythm of the horse's hooves. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had just committed treason against her people. She had used the forbidden tongue to save the enemy, and God help her, she would do it again. The town hall of Red Rock was not a hall at all, but the back room of the newly constructed dry goods store, smelling of sawdust, raw lumber, and the unwashed bodies of nervous men. The air was thick with tobacco smoke that hung in blue sheets beneath the rafters, trapping the heat of the day long after the sun had set. Major Nathaniel Briggs stood at the front of the room, a map of the territory pinned to the wall behind him. He tapped a cane against a winding black line that represented the painted river. "We cannot afford hesitation," the major declared, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a serrated knife. "The incident yesterday proves that the hostiles are not merely passing through. They are scouting. They are testing our perimeter. And they have targeted our most vulnerable." Rose sat in the corner on a wooden crate, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt the eyes of the town upon her. To them, she was a symbol, a fragile white flower that had almost been crushed by the boot of savagery. They did not see the woman who had swum naked in the river. They saw a victim who needed avenging. Miss McKenna was lucky. Briggs continued, gesturing toward her with a deferential nod that made Rose's stomach churn. "Next time, it will not be a fall from a horse. Next time, it will be fire and the scalping knife. We must strike the nest before the wasps swarm. I need volunteers to guide the cavalry. We will move in 3 days." A roar of approval went up from the men. Rose looked at their faces. She saw fear, yes, but she also saw excitement. They were eager for blood. They wanted to kill the thing they did not understand so they could sleep soundly on the land they had taken. Cole Harris stood by the door, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He caught Rose's eye and offered a tight, possessive smile. He was the hero of the hour, the man who had chased the savages away. Rose looked down at her hands, fighting the urge to scream the truth that the only savagery she had witnessed came from the men in this room. The following evening, the atmosphere in the McKenna ranch house was suffocating. Patrick McKenna sat in his armchair, nursing a glass of whiskey, while Cole Harris stood by the fireplace, turning his hat in his hands. "It is the only sensible solution, Patrick," Cole said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "With the army moving out, things are going to get rough. The reservation bands will scatter. There will be stragglers, renegades, a woman alone out here." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. "I agree," Patrick grunted. "Rose needs a husband. She needs a man who can handle a Winchester." Cole turned to Rose, who was standing by the window, staring out at the darkening prairie. He walked over to her, stepping into her personal space with the confidence of a man claiming a prize steer. "Rose," he said softly, "I have spoken to the Reverend. We can have the banns read on Sunday. We can be married before the month is out. I will build you a house in town, near the depot. You will never have to be afraid again." Rose felt a cold shiver run down her spine. A house in town, walls, fences, a life measured in tea parties and the cleaning of a deputy's gun belt. It sounded like a coffin. Rose started, her voice trembling. "It is too soon. Cole, I am still shaken." "That is exactly why," Cole pressed, reaching out to take her hand. His palm was damp and hot. "Let me keep you safe. Rose, let me do my duty for you." Patrick slammed his glass down. "For God's sake, girl, say yes. The man is offering you a future. Do not be a fool." Rose pulled her hand away gently. "I need time. Father, please, just a little time." She fled the room before they could argue further, rushing into the kitchen where her mother was kneading dough for the morning bread. Shauna McKenna did not look up, her rhythmic pounding of the dough the only sound in the room. Rose leaned against the doorframe, her breathing ragged. "He wants to own you," Shauna said quietly, without breaking her rhythm. "That is what safety means to men like him. Ownership." Rose looked at her mother's back. "Father says it is for the best." Shauna stopped kneading. She dusted the flour from her hands and turned to face her daughter. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and devoid of the deference she showed her husband. "I am not asking what your father says," Shauna said. "I am asking you, do you love him?" "Rose, does your heart beat faster when he walks into the room? Or does it sink?" Rose opened her mouth to lie, to say the proper thing, but under her mother's gaze, the words died. "I do not love him, Mama. I fear him." Shauna nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "Then do not marry him. Not yet. A loveless marriage is a long, dry winter." "But the war," Rose whispered. "They are going to kill them all. Mama, Briggs, Cole. They want blood." Shauna wiped her hands on her apron. She walked over to Rose and smoothed a stray lock of red hair from her daughter's forehead. "There are things in this world we cannot stop, child, but we can choose where we stand while they happen." 3 hours past midnight. The moon was a sliver of bone in the black sky. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic snoring of Patrick McKenna. Rose dressed in the dark. She put on her riding trousers, a scandalous garment she usually kept hidden in the bottom of her chest, and a dark woolen shirt. She pulled on her boots, wincing slightly as her healing ankle protested. but the pain was manageable now. She moved to the kitchen table. By the light of a single dying ember in the hearth, she wrote a note on a scrap of brown paper. "I need to pray. Do not look for me." It was a weak lie, but it would buy her time. She placed the note under the sugar bowl. As she turned to the back door, a shadow detached itself from the gloom of the hallway. Rose froze, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Shauna. Her mother stood in her nightdress, her long graying hair loose around her shoulders. She held a small bundle in her hands. Rose braced herself for the scolding, for the demand to return to bed. Shauna did not speak. She stepped forward and pressed the bundle into Rose's hands. It was a strip of dried venison and a small flask of water. "Be careful," Shauna whispered. "The coyotes are out tonight." Rose stared at her mother, tears stinging her eyes. Shauna knew. Somehow, she knew that Rose was not going to pray, or at least, not to the God in the church. "Mama, go," Shauna urged, opening the door. "Before the moon sets." Rose slipped out into the night, the blessing of her mother's silence lighter than any prayer. The painted river was a ribbon of silver in the darkness. Rose left her horse tethered in the thicket a mile back. Continuing on foot to avoid the noise of hooves on stone, she moved toward the place where they had met the day before, her eyes scanning the tree line. She found it near the old cottonwood tree, a single hawk feather, tied to a low-hanging branch with a strip of rawhide. It twirled gently in the night breeze. The signal. "I am here," she whispered to the darkness. "I know." The voice came from the shadows of the riverbank. Tahu stepped out. He was not wearing war paint tonight. He wore a simple buckskin shirt and leggings, his hair unbraided. He looked younger without the paint, less like the demon of the Reverend's sermons, and more like a man carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. They stood apart, separated by 5 feet of sand and a chasm of culture. "You came," Tahu said. His English was halting, each word chosen with care. "It is dangerous. They are coming for you," Rose said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Major Briggs, he has 100 men, maybe more. They have cannons. Tahu, they are coming in 3 days." Tahu nodded slowly. He did not look surprised. "The wind carries the smell of iron. We knew." He sat down on a large flat stone near the water's edge and gestured for her to sit on the driftwood log opposite him. It was a strange parley, the rancher's daughter and the warrior, sitting under the stars while their people sharpened knives to kill each other. "Why do you stay?" Rose asked, sitting down. "If you know they are coming, why not run?" "Run where?" Tahu picked up a small stone and tossed it into the river. "North is the reservation, prison. South is the desert. West," he pointed toward the vast, flat horizon. "The Llano Estacado, the staked plains, no water, no buffalo." "But you could live," Rose insisted. "The reservation, it is better than dying." Tahu looked at her, his dark eyes catching the starlight. "Is it to live in a square house, to cut my hair, to forget the songs of my father that is a slow death? Rose, that is the death of the spirit." Rose fell silent. She thought of Cole Harris and the house in town he wanted to build for her. She thought of the corset waiting on her chair. A slow death. She understood him more than she dared to admit. "They say you are monsters," Rose said softly. "The Reverend says you kill children because you serve the devil." Tahu laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And what does your God say about the soldiers who burned the village at Sand Creek? Did they serve angels when they killed our babies?" He reached into his belt and pulled out a hunting knife. Rose stiffened instinctively, but Tahu merely began to clean his fingernails. With the point, his movements relaxed. "We fight," Tahu said. "We kill, yes, because if we do not, we vanish. The wolf bites when the trap closes. Is the wolf evil?" "No," Rose whispered. "The wolf is just wild." Tahu looked up at her. The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. "You are wild too. Rose, I saw you in the water. You are not like them. You do not belong in the square house." He leaned forward, the knife slipping from his hand to clatter onto the stones between them. They both reached for it at the same time. Their hands met. Rose's fingers brushed against the rough skin of his knuckles. It was a fleeting contact, light as a moth's wing. But it sent a shock through her that was hotter than the midday sun. She did not pull away. Tahu froze. He looked at her hand, so pale and small against the dark earth, touching his own. He could feel the pulse in her wrist, frantic and alive. He turned his hand over, palm up, not grabbing her, but offering a landing place. Rose let her fingers rest in his palm for 1 second. 2. It was a transgression. It was a betrayal of everything she had been taught, and it was the most honest moment of her life. "I cannot stop them," Rose whispered, her voice breaking. "I tried to tell them. They just used my fear to fuel their hate." "You told me," Tahu said. He gently closed his fingers over hers, a squeeze that was not possessive, but anchoring. "You gave us a chance. What will you do?" Tahu withdrew his hand, picking up the knife. The moment of contact was broken, but the connection remained, vibrating in the air. "I must take the elders and the children to the deep caves," Tahu said, his voice hardening into that of a war leader. "It is a hard journey. Some will die. My mother, she is old. She cannot walk the dry lands." "You have to try," Rose urged. "I will," Tahu vowed. "But I will not leave the river without a fight. If we run without bleeding them, they will chase us forever. We must make them fear the price of our land." He looked at the eastern horizon. The stars were beginning to pale. "Go," Tahu said. "The sun wakes up. If they find you here, they will kill us both," Rose finished. She stood up, brushing the sand from her trousers. She looked down at him. "Will I see you again?" Tahu looked at the river, then back at her. "If I live, I will find you. If I die, listen to the river. I will be there." Rose turned and ran back toward the thicket, tears streaming down her face. She did not look back, because she knew if she did, she would never have the strength to leave. 2 hours later, the sun was fully up, baking the dew from the grass. Cole Harris rode along the perimeter of the McKenna ranch. He was in a foul mood. Rose's rejection the night before had stung his pride, and the whiskey he had drunk afterwards was pounding a rhythm behind his eyes. He reined in his horse near the southern fence line. He was a trekker, a man who could read the story of the earth better than he could read a book. He saw something in the dirt. Hoof prints. They were fresh, made within the last few hours. A horse moving fast, heading south. He recognized the shoe pattern. It was the McKenna mare. "Rose," he muttered. He spurred his horse, following the trail. It led away from the ranch, away from the town, straight toward the river breaks. Cole's mind began to race. Why would she ride out before dawn to pray no one prays in the saddle at a gallop? He followed the tracks until they reached the tree line where Rose had tethered her horse. He saw the trampled grass where the mare had waited. He saw the boot prints leading into the woods, small, feminine prints. But then he saw something else. Coming up from the riverbank, meeting the boot prints, were moccasin tracks. Cole dismounted, his face draining of color. He knelt, tracing the outline of the moccasin print. It was a Comanche style, with the distinctive stitching on the heel. He stood up, a roar of sound rushing in his ears. The pieces clicked together. The attack at the river where she wasn't hurt, the wet hair, the lack of corset, and now, a midnight rendezvous. She wasn't a victim. She was a traitor. A black, poisonous rage filled his chest, choking him. The woman he wanted to marry, the woman the whole town was rallying to avenge, was sneaking out to meet a savage in the dark. He looked toward the distant smudge of smoke that marked the general location of the Comanche camp. "You want a savage, Rose?" Cole whispered, his hand drifting to the butt of his pistol. "I will give you a savage." He mounted his horse and turned back toward the town. He would not confront her yet. No, that would be too easy. Major Briggs wanted a war. Cole Harris was going to give him one, and he was going to make sure that when the smoke cleared, there was no one left alive to tell the truth about Rose McKenna. He kicked his horse into a gallop, the dust rising behind him like the cloud of a gathering storm. Rose was back in her room, pretending to sleep, but the net was already closing. The choice was no longer hers to make. The fire had been lit, and now it would burn everything in its path. The command tent of the 3rd Cavalry Regiment smelled of stale tobacco smoke, oiled leather, and the sour perspiration of men planning violence. It was 2 hours past noon when Rose McKenna pushed past the protesting sentry and stood before Major Nathaniel Briggs. She was trembling, not from the chill of the canvas shade, but from the magnitude of what she was about to do. She had ridden into town under the pretense of buying lace, but her saddlebags were empty. "Major," Rose said, her voice breathless. "You must listen to me." Major Briggs looked up from his field desk. He was a man who viewed the world through the grid lines of a map, and Rose was merely a variable he had not yet calculated. He stood, feigning politeness. "Miss McKenna, this is not a place for a lady. We are preparing for maneuvers." "It is not a maneuver," Rose said, stepping forward, her hands gripping the edge of his table. "It is a slaughter, Major. I know where they are. I know the layout of the camp." Briggs's eyes sharpened. He motioned for his adjutant to leave the tent. "Go on, Miss McKenna." "There are women there," Rose pleaded, the image of the children she had seen in her mind's eye burning bright. "There are old men, babies. They are not a war party. They are families. If you ride in there with cannons, you will be murdering innocents. You must send an emissary. Offer them terms. They are scared. Major, they will listen if you offer them safe passage to the reservation." Briggs looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he reached for a pencil. He drew the map closer. "Where is the camp located exactly relative to the bend in the Painted River?" he asked calmly. "It is in the Box Canyon, 3 miles east of the ford," Rose said, believing she was negotiating. "But you must promise me." Briggs made a precise mark on the map. He circled it twice. Then he looked up, and the smile on his face chilled Rose to the marrow of her bones. "Thank you, Miss McKenna," he said. The scouts had suspected the canyon, but the terrain was deceptive. "Your confirmation is invaluable." Rose froze. You will send a negotiator. I will send B Company to block the eastern exit," Briggs said, his tone shifting to pure military pragmatism. "And a company will flush them out from the river. We will catch them in a crossfire. It will be efficient." "No," Rose gasped, backing away. "You cannot. I told you so. You would save them, not trap them." "You told me because you are a patriot, Miss McKenna," Briggs said coldly. "And because you know, deep down, that civilization cannot share a bed with savagery. You have done your country a great service. Now, go home. It will be over by sunrise." He turned his back on her to shout orders to his lieutenant. Rose stood there, the horror rising in her throat like bile. She had not saved them. She had signed their death warrants. She fled the tent, scrambling onto her horse with a clumsiness born of panic. She rode hard back to the ranch, the dust choking her, the sun mocking her with its brightness. When she burst into the ranch house, her mother was churning butter, the rhythmic thwack-thwack sound echoing in the silent kitchen. "We have to leave," Rose cried, grabbing Shauna's arm. "Mama, we have to go. Tonight. The army is moving out. It is going to be a bloodbath. If the fighting spills over, if the Comanche breaks out." Patrick McKenna entered from the hallway, his face flushed with the afternoon heat. "What is this shouting?" "Major Briggs is attacking tonight," Rose said, turning to her father. "Father, please, we are too close to the river. We need to take the wagon and go north to Amarillo, just for a few days." Patrick laughed, a harsh, dismissive bark. "Run from my own land, let Briggs do his work. It is about time. Once he clears that vermin out, our land value will double. I am not going anywhere, and neither are you. They are people. Father." Rose screamed. "Losing control. They are obstacles," Patrick roared back. "Go to your room. Rose, I will not make you hysterical." Rose looked at Shauna. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear she could not voice. "Mama," Rose whispered. Shiana looked at her husband, then at her daughter. She saw the iron in Patrick's jaw. She stepped back, pulling her arm from Rose's grip. "Go to your room, child," Shauna said softly. "Pray for their souls." Rose stared at them, the father blinded by greed, the mother silenced by duty. She realized then that the house was no longer a home. It was a tomb. She went to her room, but she did not pray. As the sun set, bleeding crimson over the horizon, the sounds of the gathering army drifted on the wind, the clanking of sabers, the jingle of bridles. Rose watched from her window. She saw Cole Harris riding with the column, his chest puffed out, a volunteer for the slaughter. He had told her father he was going to protect Rose's future, but Rose knew he was going to hunt men like trophies. She turned from the window. She stripped off her dress, the blue gingham she had worn to church, the symbol of the dutiful daughter. She kicked it into the corner. She opened the bottom drawer of her dresser and pulled out the clothes she had stolen from her brother's old trunk years ago, canvas trousers, a rough cotton shirt, a battered hat. She dressed quickly, her hands steady with a terrifying resolve. She pinned her hair up under the hat. She looked in the mirror. The girl who stared back was a stranger, stripped of softness, hardened by a choice that could not be unmade. She climbed out the window, dropping silently onto the porch roof and then to the ground. She did not take the mare. The mare was too skittish for gunfire. She went to the corral and roped the ugly, raw-boned roan her father used for fence work. He was mean, but he had stamina and was not gun-shy. Rose swung into the saddle. She did not look back at the house. She turned the roan toward the river, toward the line of soldiers that was slowly snaking its way through the dark. She was going to cross the line. She was going to warn the enemy. The night was moonless, a suffocating blanket of black. Rose kept to the low ground, navigating by the silhouette of the mesas against the stars. She could hear the army to her left, the heavy thud of hundreds of hooves. They were moving into the pincer formation Briggs had described. She had to get ahead of them. She pushed the roan into a gallop, risking a broken leg in the gopher-holed dark. The wind whipped her face, stinging her eyes. "Halt! Who goes there?" The shout came from nowhere. A darker shadow detached itself from a cluster of scrub oak. A picket sentry. Rose did not stop. She kicked the roan, lying flat against the horse's neck. "Halt, or I will fire! Crack!" A muzzle flash lit up the night like a lightning strike. The bullet whined past her ear, close enough to snap the air. The roan surged forward, panicked by the noise. "Rider!" the sentry screamed. "Rider breaking the line!" More shouts erupted. Hooves pounded behind her. Rose risked a glance back. 2 cavalrymen were giving chase, their silhouettes hunched low. They were faster than the roan. Rose veered sharply to the right, heading for the jagged spine of rocks that marked the edge of the Badlands. It was suicide to ride a horse through there in the dark, but it was her only chance. She hit the scree slope, the horse scrabbling for footing. Stones clattered down into the ravine, loud as thunder in the quiet night. Bang, bang bullets sparked off the rocks around her. One struck the cantle of her saddle, sending splinters into her leg. She cried out, but carried on. "Lose him in the rocks," one soldier shouted. "He will break his neck." Rose drove the horse into a narrow fissure between 2 boulders. She bailed out of the saddle, slapping the roan on the rump to send him running deeper into the canyon as a decoy. She threw herself into the dust, crawling into a crevice beneath an overhang. She lay there, her chest heaving, the taste of limestone dust and terror in her mouth. The soldiers rode past, following the sound of her horse. She waited until the hoofbeats faded. Then she crawled out. She was on foot now. The Comanche camp was still a mile away. She began to run. Her boots slipped on the loose shell. Her lungs burned. Every shadow looked like a soldier. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a ghost. She reached the perimeter of the box canyon. It was quiet. Too quiet. Suddenly, a hand clamped over her mouth. An arm of iron wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She was dragged backward into the darkness of a mesquite thicket. Rose struggled. kicking out, reaching for the small knife in her belt. "Be still!" a voice hissed in her ear. She froze. She knew that voice. It was the voice of the earth, the voice of the river. The hand released her mouth. She spun around. Tahu stood there. He was painted for war, black stripes across his eyes, red ochre on his chest. He held a Winchester rifle, and his eyes were hard, glittering with adrenaline. But when he looked at her, the hardness fractured. He took in her appearance, the men's trousers, the dust coating her face, the wildness in her eyes. "Rose," he whispered. It was a question and a prayer. "They are coming," Rose gasped, clutching his arm. Her fingers dug into his skin. "Briggs, he knows. I told him. I thought I was saving you, but he is using it. Pincer movement. B company from the east. A company from the river. They are going to trap you." Tahu looked at her. He saw the guilt ravaging her face, the terrifying risk she had taken to bring this news. He did not ask how she got there. He simply reached out and took her shoulders. His hands were strong, warm, and real. It was the first time he had touched her like this, not to hold her down for safety, not a fleeting brush of fingers, but a solid, grounding grip. "You ran through the guns," Tahu said. It was not a question. "I could not let them die," Rose sobbed, her legs giving way. Tahu caught her. He pulled her against his chest for one brief, stolen second. He smelled of war paint and smoke, but under that, he smelled of life. "Breathe," he commanded. "You have bought us time." He released her and turned to the two warriors behind him. He spoke rapidly in Comanche. The warriors' eyes widened, and they looked at Rose with a new expression, not hatred, but awe. They nodded and vanished into the night. "What will you do?" Rose asked, wiping the tears and dust from her face. Tahu looked at the canyon entrance. He could hear the distant rumble of the approaching army. "If we fight them head-on, we die," Tahu said grimly. "If we run east, we run into their guns. Then what?" "The river," Tahu said. "The water is low. There is a cave system under the western bluff. It floods in the spring, but now it is dry enough for the women and children, and the soldiers." Tahu's eyes narrowed. "We will give them a fire to light their way." 10 minutes later, the first shots rang out. The army advanced with disciplined precision, confident in their surprise attack. But as they entered the mouth of the canyon, the world exploded. Tahu and his warriors had set fire to the dry brush packed at the narrow entrance. The wind, funneling through the canyon, turned the spark into an inferno within seconds. A wall of fire roared up, separating the two wings of the army. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, rearing as the flames licked at them. The soldiers fired blindly into the smoke. "To the river!" Tahu shouted, pulling Rose by the hand. "Move!" They ran toward the water. The air was thick with ash and the stench of burning sage. Around them, the Comanche women were ushering children into the black maw of a cave hidden beneath the overhang of the riverbank. "Go with them!" Tahu shouted over the roar of the fire. "Go!" "No!" Rose shouted back. "I'll stay." A volley of rifle fire chewed up the ground around them. The soldiers had broken through the smoke. "There, by the water!" a voice screamed. Rose turned and saw a figure on horseback emerging from the haze. It was Cole Harris. His face was twisted in a mask of soot and fury. Rose saw her standing beside the painted warrior, saw her hand in his. Cole did not hesitate. He spurred his horse, charging them. He swung his lasso, a skill honed by years of breaking wild mustangs. The loop hissed through the air. Rose tried to duck, but the rope settled over her shoulders. Cole yanked hard, jerking her off her feet. She hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, dragged through the mud. "Rose!" Tahu roared. He raised his rifle, but his magazine was empty. He threw the weapon down and drew his knife, sprinting toward the horsemen. Cole hauled Rose up, keeping the rope taut, using her as a shield. He pointed his revolver at Tahu. "Stop!" Cole screamed. "One step closer and I put a bullet in her brain." Tahu skidded to a halt, his chest heaving. He stood 20 feet away, the knife heavy in his hand. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look like a demon of vengeance. Cole laughed, a sound that bordered on madness. "Look at you," he spat at Rose, who was clawing at the noose around her neck. "Dressed like a man, consorting with animals. You sold us out. Rose, you sold out your own blood." "They are not animals," Rose choked out. "You are—" "I am the law." Cole shouted. He leveled the pistol at Tahu's chest. "And I am going to end this. Watch him die. Rose, watch your savage die." Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to slow down. Rose saw the hammer of the Colt revolver pull back. She saw Tahu tensing his muscles to leap, knowing he would never bridge the distance in time. He was going to die. He was standing there, open and vulnerable, to keep Cole from shooting her. Rose did not think. She did not calculate. She simply acted. She threw her body weight violently to the left, running toward Cole's horse, creating slack in the rope. She lunged at Cole's arm just as the gun fired. Bang! The shot went wild. No! Tahu spun around, the force of the bullet catching him in the shoulder. A spray of bright crimson blood arched through the air, splattering onto the river water. "No!" Rose screamed. Tahu did not fall. The pain seemed to galvanize him. He roared, a sound that came from the depths of his ancestors, and charged. Cole tried to cock the hammer again, but Tahu was on him. Tahu launched himself off a rock, tackling Cole out of the saddle. The two men hit the ground with a sickening crunch. The pistol flew from Cole's hand. They rolled toward the riverbank, a tangle of limbs and hatred. Tahu abandoned his knife. This was too personal for Steele. He smashed his fist into Cole's face. Once, twice. Cole fought back dirty, gouging at Tahu's eyes, kneeing him in the groin. Rose scrambled to her feet, shaking the rope loose. "Tahu!" Tahu had the upper hand. He pinned Cole to the mud, his hands finding the deputy's throat. He squeezed. Cole's face turned purple, his eyes bulging. Tahu could end it. He could snap the neck of the man who wanted to exterminate his people. But then Tahu looked up. He saw Rose standing there, horrified, the firelight illuminating her tear-streaked face. "Do not become the monster they say you are." Her eyes seemed to plead. Tahu snarled and released his grip. He grabbed Cole by the collar and slammed his head against a rock, knocking him unconscious. "Come!" Tahu gasped. Clutching his bleeding shoulder, he stumbled toward Rose. "Your shoulder!" Rose cried, reaching for him. "It is nothing." Tahu lied, though his face was gray with shock. "The soldiers! More are coming!" Indeed, shadows were moving through the smoke. The main force of a company was closing in. Tahu grabbed Rose's hand. They stood on the edge of the embankment. Below them, the painted river churned, swollen by the recent rains upstream. It was dark, fast, and dangerous. "We cannot go to the cave," Tahu said. "They will see us. We must take the river." "I cannot swim in the current," Rose said, looking at the black water. "I will hold you," Tahu vowed. He looked at her, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "My eyes claimed you in the water. My hands will save you in the water. Trust me." Rose looked back at the carnage, the burning brush, the unconscious form of Cole Harris, the approaching soldiers. Then she looked at Tahu. "I trust you," she whispered. They jumped. The cold water hit them like a sledgehammer. The current seized them, dragging them down into the suffocating dark. Rose felt Tahu's arm wrap around her waist, an iron band against the chaos of the river. They were swept away, two specks of life in a torrent of destruction, leaving the fire and the hatred behind on the burning shore. The dawn that broke over the painted river was a bruised and ugly thing. The sky was not the clear, hopeful blue of the Panhandle, but a gray, choked expanse, heavy with the soot of the night's fires. The smoke from the burning brush at the box canyon still drifted westward, a grim reminder of the violence that had nearly consumed the valley. Major Briggs's campaign had stalled. The pincer movement, brilliant on paper, had collapsed in the chaos of the fire and the river. While the army had seized the canyon, they found only empty wickiups and a few old horses. The people, the women, The children. The heart of the tribe had vanished into the earth, escaping through the subterranean river caves. The soldiers returned to their bivouacs sullen and soot-stained, nursing burns and a grudge that was rapidly turning poisonous. But they had brought back one prisoner. Rose McKenna sat on a hard wooden bench in the vestry of the First Church of Red Rock. Her clothes were stiff with river mud and dried blood, some hers, some Tahu's. Her hair, usually so vibrant, hung in damp, tangled strings around her face. Her wrists were bound with rough hemp rope, not by the army, but by the town council's order. The door creaked open, admitting a slice of harsh daylight. It was Shauna McKenna. She carried a tin cup of water and a piece of cornbread wrapped in a napkin. Rose looked up, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She expected shame. She expected the weeping, broken mother who had stood silently in the kitchen while Patrick raged. Instead, Shauna closed the door and locked it. She walked over to Rose, her steps firm, her face set in lines of granite. "Drink," Shauna said, holding the cup to Rose's lips. Rose drank greedily, the water cool against her parched throat. "Mama, Father, is he—" "Your father is at the saloon," Shauna said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He is drinking to forget that his daughter is a traitor, or to build up the courage to disown you. It does not matter which." "And you?" Rose asked, her voice trembling. "Do you hate me, Mama?" Shauna set the cup down. She reached out and brushed a smudge of soot from Rose's cheek. Her hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a suppressed rage. "I watched you ride out last night," Shauna whispered. "I stood on the porch and I watched my little girl ride into hell to save people she does not know." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I have never been so terrified, and I have never been so proud." Rose sobbed, a dry, hacking sound. "They say I am a whore. Mama, I heard them through the window. They say I slept with him to buy my life." "Let them talk," Shauna said fiercely, gripping Rose's shoulders. "Their tongues are forked like snakes. Listen to me. Rose, they are going to put you on trial out there. Not a real trial with a judge, but a reckoning. Cole Harris is out there right now, spinning a web of lies to make himself the hero. Cole tried to kill him," Rose said. "He tried to kill Tahu." "If you deny it," Shauna continued, ignoring the name, "if you say you were kidnapped, that you were delirious, they might let you go. You could live here. You could marry a quiet man from another county in a few years." Rose looked at her mother. "But I would lose myself." "Yes," Shauna agreed. "You would be safe, but you would be hollow." She leaned in close, her forehead resting against Rose's. "Do not be hollow. Rose, I have been silent for 30 years. I have let your father and this town decide what is right. No more. If you stand, I stand with you, even if the whole of Red Rock turns their backs." 5 miles away, in a deep limestone fissure known as the Devil's Throat, the survivors of the Comanche band huddled in the shadows. Tahu sat near the entrance, his left shoulder bound in a poultice of moss and sage. The bullet had passed through the flesh, missing the bone, but the loss of blood had left him gray and shivering. Little Fawn was tending the fire, her face streaked with tears. "We should go, Tahu. The scouts say the soldiers are regrouping. We can make the high plains in 2 days." "We wait," Tahu said, his voice raspy. "For what?" a young warrior named Blackstone demanded. "The white woman. She is gone. Tahu." "The river took her back to her people. She is probably drinking tea while we bleed." "She saved us," Tahu snapped, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Without her warning, we would be ash in that canyon." A scout slid down the scree slope, breathing hard. He looked at Tahu with wide eyes. "The town," the scout panted. "The white men. They are gathering at their spirit house. They have the woman. They have tied her up." Tahu struggled to sit up. "Tied her. They say she is a traitor," the scout reported. "They shout about hanging. They say she chose the Comanche over her own blood." Blackstone spat on the ground. "Let them hang her. One less enemy." Tahu stood up. The world swayed for a moment. But he locked his knees, forcing the dizziness away. He reached for his knife, then stopped. He unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop to the dust. "What are you doing?" Little Fawn cried, grabbing his arm. "I am going to Red Rock," Tahu said. "You will be killed before you reach the first house," Blackstone yelled. "It is suicide. You are our leader. You cannot throw your life away for a white woman." "She threw her life away for you," Tahu roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. The camp fell silent. Tahu looked at his people, the tired women, the frightened children. "If she dies because she helped us," Tahu said quietly, "then the honor of the people dies with her. If we let them kill her for an act of mercy, we are no better than the bluecoats." He walked to his horse, a Mustang that had survived the fire. He mounted with difficulty, his face pale with pain. He looked at Little Fawn. "Find me a white feather," he commanded. The sun was high and cruel by noon. The square in front of the church was packed with the citizens of Red Rock. It was a carnival of righteous indignation. The Reverend stood on the church steps, clutching a Bible like a weapon. Major Briggs stood to one side, arms crossed, observing the proceedings with cold detachment. This was a civilian matter now, a town cleansing itself. Rose was brought out. She blinked in the harsh light. They had not untied her hands. She stood at the bottom of the steps, isolated in a circle of dust. Cole Harris stepped forward. He had a bandage around his head where Tahu had smashed him against the rock, and his arm was in a sling. The injuries made him look martial and heroic. "Friends," Cole began, his voice thick with emotion, "it breaks my heart to stand here. You all know my intentions toward this woman. I loved her." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. "But the woman I loved is gone," Cole continued, pointing a finger at Rose. "Last night, I rode into the fire to save her. I thought she had been taken, but what did I find?" He paused for dramatic effect. "I found her fighting alongside them. I found her in the arms of that savage, Tahu. She cut the rope I used to try and rescue her. She chose the bed of a murderer over the safety of her family. Shame," a woman in the back screamed. "Traitor! She led them to the river," Cole shouted, his voice rising. "She helped them escape because of her. The threat remains because of her. Good men might die tomorrow." The Reverend stepped up. "Rose McKenna," he intoned. "You have consorted with the heathen. You have brought the devil into our midst. Do you deny these charges?" Rose looked at the crowd. She saw the faces of people she had known all her life, the baker, the blacksmith, the women she sewed with. They looked at her with hatred that was terrifying in its purity. She looked at her father, standing near the back. Patrick McKenna would not meet her eyes. He stared at his boots, a broken man who valued his standing more than his flesh and blood. Then she looked at her mother. Shauna stood in the front row, her chin high, her eyes locking onto Rose's with a fierce, burning love. Rose took a deep breath. "I deny nothing," she said clearly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried in the silence. "I deny that they are devils," Rose said. "I deny that saving children from burning to death is a sin, and I deny that Cole Harris is a hero. He tried to shoot an unarmed man in the back." "Liar!" Cole screamed, lunging toward her, but was held back by two men. "She is bewitched. Hang her!" The chant started low and became louder. "Hang her, hang her!" Major Briggs watched, his hand resting on the hilt of his saber. He would not stop it. A hanging would galvanize the territory, bringing more funding for his campaign. The crowd began to close in. Someone threw a clod of dirt. It struck Rose's cheek, crumbling into dust. She did not flinch. She closed her eyes, waiting for the first blow. Thud, 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 thud. The sound of hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. A hush fell over the edge of the crowd. It spread inward like a ripple in a pond until the shouting died away into a confused silence. A single rider was entering the square. It was Tahu. He sat tall on his Mustang, though his face was gray with pain. He wore no war paint. His chest was bare, revealing the bloody bandage on his shoulder. His hands were empty, held out from his sides to show he carried no weapon. But it was what was in his hair that stopped the breath of the town. A single, large, white feather, glowing in the sun. The universal sign of a parley. The sign of a man coming in peace to speak truth. "It's him," Cole shouted, drawing his revolver with his good hand. "Shoot him, it's savage." A dozen rifles were raised. The metallic click-clack of hammers being cocked echoed across the square. Tahu did not stop. He rode straight toward the church steps, his eyes fixed only on Rose. "Fire!" Cole screamed. "No!" Shauna McKenna threw herself forward. She ran out of the crowd and stood directly in the path of the rifles, placing her body between the gunman and the Comanche warrior. "Shauna, get back!" Patrick roared, finally looking up. "You will have to shoot me first," Shauna screamed, spreading her arms wide. "Is this your civilization, shooting an unarmed man, shooting a mother?" The gunmen hesitated. They could not shoot Shauna McKenna. She was the woman who had birthed half the babies in the county. Tahu stopped his horse 10 feet from Rose. He slid from the saddle. His legs nearly buckled, but he caught himself on the stirrup leather. He walked toward Rose, ignoring the guns, ignoring the hate. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the ropes on her wrists. A flicker of anger crossed his face, but he suppressed it. He turned to face the crowd. "I am Tahu," he said. His voice was rough, accented, but it rang with a dignity that made the reverend seem small. "I am of the Quahati." He looked at Cole Harris. "This man says she betrayed you. He lies." Tahu swept his gaze across the faces of the townspeople. "She came to me to save life, your life, and my life. She told me to leave so your sons would not have to die killing mine." He pointed to his shoulder. "To the bloody bandage. This man shot me, not in battle, but when I stood to protect her. He used her as a shield." "He's lying," Cole yelled, his face purple. "He is trying to trick you. Look at him," Tahu shouted, his voice gaining strength. "He wants land. He wants blood. He does not want peace. I came here today to die if I must, but I will not let you kill her for having a heart that is bigger than this town." He turned back to Rose. He reached out and, with gentle fingers, touched the bruise on her cheek where the dirt clod had struck. "She saw me," Tahu said softly, speaking to the crowd but looking at Rose, "when I was nothing to you but a monster. She saw a man. If that is a crime in your God's house, then your God is small." Silence stretched across the square. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. But in that silence, something shifted. Mrs. Miller, the baker's wife, whose son had died in a skirmish 2 years ago, lowered her eyes. She looked at Shauna standing defiantly before the guns. She looked at the wounded warrior standing unarmed to defend a white woman. "Put the gun down, Cole." "Mrs." Miller said. Her voice was quiet, but it was a command. "What?" Cole stared at her. "I said put it down." "Mrs." Miller repeated. "The man came in peace. He is bleeding, and Shauna is right. We are not murderers. He is a Comanche," Cole sputtered. "He is a man," the blacksmith said, lowering his rifle. "And he has got more guts than you, hiding behind a woman's skirt." One by one, the rifles lowered. The mob mentality, so fragile and hot, began to cool under the weight of shame. They saw the scene for what it was, a mother protecting her child, and an enemy showing more honor than their own deputy. Major Briggs watched the tide turn. He knew the moment for violence had passed. If he ordered fire now, he would have a riot on his hands. But against him, he was a pragmatist. "Deputy Harris," Briggs said sharply, "holster your weapon." "Major," Cole protested. "Holster it," Briggs barked, "or I will have you arrested for inciting a riot." Cole looked around. He saw the disgust in the eyes of the town. He saw Rose looking at him with cold pity. With a snarl of impotent rage, he shoved his pistol into its holster and stormed away. Pushing through the crowd, Tahu let out a breath he had been holding. He swayed, his strength finally failing him. Rose stepped forward, ignoring her bound hands, and caught him with her shoulder. "You came," she whispered, tears streaming down the soot on her face. "You fool! You came!" "I could not let the fire take you," Tahu murmured, his eyes half closing. Shauna stepped up. She produced a small knife from her pocket and slashed the ropes binding Rose's wrists. She rubbed her daughter's arms for a second, then turned to Tahu. "You are hurt," Shauna said briskly, reverting to the practical woman she was. "We cannot treat you here. The mood is too fragile." "I must go," Tahu said, trying to stand straight. "My people wait." "You cannot ride," Rose said, grabbing his arm. "I must," Tahu insisted. He looked at Major Briggs, who was walking toward them. The major stopped a few paces away. He looked at Tahu with a grudging professional respect. "Take your people," Briggs said quietly. "Move them south of the Caprock. Today. If I find you north of the river tomorrow, the truce ends." It was not peace. It was not justice. But it was a reprieve. Tahu nodded. "We go." He mounted his horse with Rose's help. He looked down at her. His hand lingered near her hair, wanting to touch, but he pulled back. The town was watching. "This is not the end," Rose whispered. "No," Tahu said. "The river flows on." He turned his horse and rode slowly out of the square. The crowd parted for him, not out of fear this time, but out of a silent, bewildered awe. They watched him go, a solitary figure disappearing into the dust of the street. Rose stood on the church steps, her mother's arm around her. She watched him until he was just a speck against the vast, indifferent sky. She felt the eyes of the town on her, but they did not burn anymore. She had walked through the fire, and she had not burned. She looked at her father, who was still standing at the back of the crowd. He turned away, unable to face her. Rose felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant. She had lost a father, perhaps, but she had found herself. "Come," Shauna said softly. "Let us go home. We have work to do." Rose nodded. She turned her back on the church, on the major, on the town that had tried to hang her. She walked beside her mother, her head high, the ghost of Tahu's touch still warm on her skin. The battle was over, but the war for her life, her real life, had just begun. The dust in the square of red rock did not settle quickly. It hung in the air, a gritty testament to the violence that had almost consumed the town. Major Nathaniel Briggs stood on the steps of the church, looking down at the crowd with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who measured victory not in morality, but in logistics. He knew he could not hang Rose McKenna. The moment Shauna had stepped in front of the guns, Rose had ceased to be a traitor and had become a martyr. Hanging a woman, especially one whose mother stood ready to die with her, would turn the territory against him. It would bring investigators from Washington, newspapermen from the East, and scrutiny he could not afford, but he could not let her stay. Her presence was a fracture in the foundation of the order he was trying to build. "Citizens of Red Rock," Major Briggs announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "We have seen enough madness today. The army is here to secure the peace, not to execute civilians." He turned his gaze to Rose, who was still leaning against her mother, her face streaked with soot and tears. "However," Briggs continued, his tone hardening like drying concrete, "Miss McKenna has made her allegiances clear. She has chosen to aid the enemy of this government. She has endangered the lives of my soldiers and your sons." He walked down 2 steps, stopping just above Rose's eye level. "I will not hang you, Rose McKenna, but I will not permit you to remain in this town. You are a blight on its conscience. You are hereby exiled from Red Rock. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings. If you are found within the town limits after the sun sets, you will be arrested as a hostile combatant." It was a shrewd verdict. It stripped Rose of her home without making Briggs a butcher. Cole Harris stepped forward, his face a mask of bruised pride and simmering hatred. He looked at Rose, the woman he had claimed to love only hours ago. Now, he saw only the instrument of his humiliation. "You heard the major," Cole spat, his voice thick with venom. "Get out, and do not think you can come crawling back when that savage tires of you. You are dead to us. Rose, if I ever see your face on my land again, I will shoot you down like a coyote." He turned to the crowd, raising his good arm. "And hear me now. No Indian will ever set foot in this valley again as long as I draw breath. We will build a wall of rifles if we have to." Rose looked at Cole. She did not feel fear anymore. She felt a profound, aching pity for a man so consumed by ownership that he had forgotten how to be human. "You already have your wall, Cole," Rose said softly. "You built it around your heart a long time ago." She turned to her father. Patrick McKenna stood by the hitching post, staring at the ground. He looked old, shrunken inside his coat. "Father," Rose whispered. Patrick did not look up. He turned his back on her, a gesture more painful than a slap, and walked toward the saloon. He chose his pride. He chose the town. Rose took a shaky breath. She turned to Shauna. "I will go. Mama, you should go back to him. He will need you." Shauna McKenna straightened her spine. She looked at the retreating back of her husband, then at the vast, open horizon where Tahu had disappeared. She looked at the town that had cheered for her daughter's death. "No," Shauna said. The word was small, but it had the weight of a mountain. "I have spent 30 years cleaning his house and silencing my own soul. I am done with silence." Shauna took Rose's hand. "I am coming with you." "Mama, you cannot," Rose protested. "It will be a hard life. We have nothing." "We have our hands," Shauna said, leading Rose toward their wagon. "And we have our honor. That is more than any man in this square possesses." 18 months later, the valley lay nestled in a fold of the earth, far to the west of the railroad lines, in a place the surveyors had marked as uninhabitable badlands. They were wrong. A tributary of the Painted River flowed here, fed by deep springs that never ran dry, creating a ribbon of emerald green amidst the red rocks. It was not a town. It was something looser, something wilder and more fragile. A cluster of structures dotted the riverbank traditional Comanche wickiups made of buffalo hide standing alongside rough-hewn log cabins. Smoke curled lazily into the twilight air, smelling of roasting venison and baking bread. Children ran through the tall grass, Comanche children with hair like raven wings, and a few white children. The offspring of settlers who had grown tired of the town's rigid laws and had sought a different kind of freedom. Rose stood by the river's edge. She was washing clothes, the water cold against her hands. She was thinner than she had been in Red Rock, her skin browned by the sun, her hands calloused from work. She wore a dress made of buckskin, soft and durable, but she wore it with a white cotton blouse Shauna had sewn. She was a bridge between two worlds. She heard footsteps behind her. She did not flinch. She knew the rhythm of that walk. Tahu stood there. He had filled out since the starving days of the war. The wound on his shoulder had healed into a jagged, silvery scar that moved with his muscle. He wore a mixture of clothes, leggings, and moccasins, but also a flannel shirt. He did not speak. He simply reached out and took the basket of wet clothes from her hands. "I can carry it," Rose said, smiling. "I know," Tahu replied, "but my hands are empty, and yours are cold." They walked together along the riverbank. It was a mirror of that day, nearly 2 years ago, when he had stood on the cliff and she had been in the water. "Do you remember?" Rose asked, looking at the water. "I remember every stone," Tahu said. He stopped and turned to her. They were in plain sight of the village. Yet they were alone, in the old world, the white world. A man would have been scandalized to be seen holding a woman's hand so openly. In the Comanche world, public displays were reserved, but here, in this new place, they were carving out of the dust. The rules were their own. Tahu took her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, and solid. "My eyes claimed you then," Tahu said softly, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. "I watched you swim, and I thought you were a spirit of the water. I swore I would never touch you unless you asked." "And now," Rose whispered, her heart beating a rhythm against her ribs that felt like coming home. "Now," Tahu said, raising her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "My hands claim you too, not as a prize, Rose, but as the other half of my own heart." The ceremony took place at sunset, when the sky was a bruised purple and the first stars were beginning to prick through the veil of light. There was no church. There was no altar. There was only a large fire built in the center of the clearing, and the people of the valley gathered in a circle around it. It was a wedding of scraps and patches, woven together into something beautiful. Shiana stood on one side of the fire. She wore her best dress, the gray silk she had saved from the ranch, and she held a Bible that was worn soft from use. Gray Wolf, the Comanche elder who had survived the long trek, stood on the other side. He held a ceremonial blanket, woven with patterns of the sun and the rain. Rose and Tahu walked into the circle together. They did not walk one behind the other. They walked side by side. Shiana stepped forward first. Her voice quavered slightly, but gained strength as she spoke the words of her ancestors. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want," she recited. "He maketh me lie down in green pastures, he leadeth me beside the still waters." She looked at Tahu and Rose. In the eyes of the church, this might be a sin, but in the eyes of love, it is a sacrament. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. Then Gray Wolf stepped forward. He spoke in Comanche, his voice like dry leaves rustling. He draped the blanket over Tahu's shoulders, then instructed Tahu to open it. Tahu extended his arm, wrapping the blanket around Rose so that they stood cocooned together within its folds. It was the symbol of a shared life, a shared warmth against the cold world, before the earth and the sky, Tahu said, his voice clear and strong. He spoke in English so that everyone could understand. "I take this woman, not to own, not to command, but to walk with. I will be her shield when the arrows fly. I will be her fire when the snow falls." Rose looked up at him. Her eyes were shining. "And I take this man," she vowed, "to learn his tongue, to honor his blood. I will teach our children the stories of Christ and the stories of the coyote. I will teach them that the only true enemy is hate." There was no exchange of rings. Instead, Tahu tied a leather thong around Rose's wrist, on which hung a small, smooth river stone, and Rose tied a strip of blue ribbon from her old dress around Tahu's wrist. The gathered people, the outcasts, the survivors, the dreamers cheered. It was not the polite applause of a church wedding. It was a raw, joyous sound, accompanied by the beating of a drum and the clapping of hands. Life in the valley was not easy. The winters were harsh, and the summers were brutal. There were days when the crops failed, days when the wells ran low, but there was peace. Shauna McKenna found a new purpose. She was no longer the silent shadow in a rancher's kitchen. She was the grandmother of the valley. She planted a garden near the river, rows of Irish potatoes growing next to the corn and squash of the Comanche Three Sisters. She taught the women how to bake bread in clay ovens, and in return, they taught her which roots could heal a fever and which berries could dye cloth. Little Fawn, now a young woman with a fierce intelligence, gathered the children by the riverbank every afternoon. It was a strange school. There were children with blonde hair and blue eyes sitting next to children with skin like copper. "This is the river," Little Fawn would say, pointing to the water. "In the white tongue, it is river. In our tongue, it is hunu. Both words are true. The water does not care what you call it." She taught them the history of the land, not the history written in the books of the victors, but the history of the people who had lived and died on the soil. And Rose taught them to read and write, using charcoal on slabs of slate, ensuring that this new generation would have the weapons of words as well as bows. On the last night of the story, the moon was full, hanging over the valley like a great silver coin. Rose and Tahu sat on the flat rocks by the swimming hole, their feet dangling in the water. The sounds of the village had faded into sleep. Rose leaned her head on Tahu's shoulder. She felt the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I was thinking," Rose said, a smile playing on her lips. "About what?" Tahu asked, his hand resting absently on her knee. "About that first day," she said, "when I was in the water." Tahu chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "I remember. You looked like a frightened deer when you saw me." I was mortified, Rose admitted, a blush rising to her cheeks even now. I thought I had lost everything, my honor, my dignity. I thought— She paused, looking at the moonlight dancing on the ripples. I thought that because you had seen me naked, you had stolen something from me. Tahu turned to look at her. His eyes were serious, filled with a love that had been tempered by fire and time. And now, he asked. Now I know, Rose said softly. You did not steal anything. You found me. I was hiding behind my clothes, behind my father's name, behind the walls of that town. When I was in the water, I was just me, and you were the only one brave enough to look at me and not see a sinner or a saint. Tahu cupped her face in his hands. I saw a soul, he whispered, a soul that was too big for a corset. Rose laughed, the sound bright and clear in the night air. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a desperate kiss of two people fleeing death, but the slow, deep kiss of two people who had built a life. The world out there, Rose said, pulling back slightly to gesture toward the dark horizon, toward the railroad and the towns and the anger of men like Cole Harris and Major Briggs. They still call it a sin, Tahu, what we are, what we have built. Let them talk, Tahu said, echoing the words Shiana had spoken so long ago. They build fences, we build bridges. He looked at the river, flowing endlessly from the dark into the light. The water flows, Tahu said. It cuts through the rock, it washes away the blood. It does not ask if the land is white or red, it just gives life. Rose rested her head on his shoulder again. Yes, she whispered. It just gives life. The camera of our mind's eye pulls back, rising above the couple sitting by the water, rising above the smoke of the quiet village, rising above the canyon walls. We see the painted river winding through the vast, starlit landscape of the Texas Panhandle. On one side lie the ruins of the old forts and the scars of the railroad. On the other, the open plains. But here, in this hidden valley, the river flows between two banks that are no longer separated by war. It flows through a land where freedom is not measured in acres owned or enemies killed, but in the courage to choose love over hate and to call the stranger brother. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Rose and Tahu. Stories like this remind us that history is not just about battles and maps, but about the human hearts that beat beneath the dust. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the American West. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button. And if you really want to support the channel and help more people hear these stories, please smash that hype button. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Thank you, and happy trails.